Hello, so we're continuing our discussion on the gradient ascent algorithm. So if you recall that the last time, in the last video, we discussed the gradient ascent algorithm in one dimension. And the idea is that if we are dealing with an objective function whose second derivative or Hessian is difficult to obtain and calculate, or cumbersome and more expensive to evaluate, then in those situations, we might be inclined to use something other than Newton-Raphson algorithm. And gradient ascent algorithm is one of the more popular algorithms for this purpose. Now, the idea also is that in the gradient ascent algorithm, what we do in one dimensions, let's go back to the previous sort of notes, is that we up the next iteration is the previous iteration plus a small t that we choose, which is called the learning rate or the step size, times the derivative of the objective function at the previous value of theta k, or theta, which is theta k, right? And then the idea in this was that you have an objective function over here that looks something like this. Then what you do is at any given point, let's say this is your theta 0, right? At a current theta, or maybe not theta 0, let's call it theta k to be consistent. So this is our current theta k. In the Newton-Raphson algorithm, what we do is we do a second order Taylor series approximation, which would be something like this, right? In this case, because it's a convex, at this position, our objective function is convex. So this would be the second order Taylor series expansion. But in gradient ascent, what we do is we do a second order approximation. For sure, we do a quadratic approximation, but we always do a concave quadratic approximation. And we do that by essentially assuming that the second derivative is 1 by t, okay? Where t is some positive number. So our approximation looks something like this. And then as, theta value keeps moving, our approximation could get more and more, something like this. Okay? So that's essentially what's happening in the gradient ascent algorithm, but in one dimensions. And so naturally, you should then ask, what happens in higher dimensions? We did see utility of this algorithm, and I'll show code again in the next video of, you start from some place, you are always going to converge to a local maxima for an appropriately chosen value of t. And we'll look at this in the next video. But in this video, I wanted to talk about gradient ascent in higher dimensions. So when we are in higher dimensions, our problem statement is still the same. We want to find theta star, which is still the argument that minimizes f of theta. The only difference now is that theta is in capital theta, where capital theta is some subset of, let's say, Rp. So we're in p dimensions essentially, and because we are in p dimensions, our objective function, our f, is in p dimensions, which means that we don't have a first derivative in the usual way that's a scalar. We have a gradient vector, okay? So if we do a similar multivariate Taylor series expansion, right, and we've gone through the Taylor series expansion in previous lectures, if we do a multivariate Taylor series expansion of the second order and then replace the Hessian with a concave Hessian, a Hessian that's constant and concave, which is in fact a diagonal matrix, then we're going to see exactly the same sort of iteration update, which is really what I write down here. So we get theta k plus 1 is equal to theta k plus t times gradient of f theta k. Now again, if you recall, gradient of f theta k from Newton-Raphson recall is nothing but a long vector, which is basically del f by del theta 1 going up to del f by del theta k, right? Sorry, not theta k, theta p. So it's basically all the partial derivatives of the function f with respect to the sequence of theta components stacked up together, okay? But naturally, this is only the iteration update. How do you actually run the algorithm? Well, this is the algorithm. First, as always, you need to choose an appropriate starting value of theta. You also need to choose an appropriate tolerance that's going to help us determine when we have enough quality of closeness to a local optima, local maxima. And then we're going to choose a learning rate t as well. So three choices: theta, 0, epsilon tolerance, and the learning rate. Now for any k, theta k plus 1 is equal to theta k plus t times gradient f of theta k. This is our iteration update, which we are now hopefully well familiar with. But we want to keep doing this until our theta k plus 1, the next value, is actually close to our local maxima. We can check by two different ideas. The one that I like in multi-dimensions particularly is to check when the gradient vector is less than epsilon. So f prime over here is another way of basically writing, gradient f theta k plus 1. These are the same things, right? And I want to see when the norm of this gradient vector is less than my chosen value of the tolerance epsilon. And which means that because when that happens, I know I have a local optima, local maxima. And then when that happens, I return theta k plus 1. Again, there is no guarantee that we are going to converge to a global maxima if we have a non-concave objective function. But nonetheless, we will be certain that we're going to converge to a local maxima when t is chosen appropriately. Okay, this is what it looks like in higher dimensions, in p dimensions. Now, our sort of go-to higher dimension example is the logistic regression example, which is what we come back to. So recall in the logistic regression example, we have a response. It's a regression problem. So we have a bunch of covariates and we have a response. The difference is the response is no longer a continuous response. So response is not, okay, we cannot assume that it's Gaussian distributed, but instead it's a response of ones and zeros. Okay, which means y's are Bernoulli distributed. And based on the characteristics of every observation I, the probability of success of y is going to be different. Okay, which means that for every ith observation, I have a covariate xi1 up to xip. Okay, so this is my vector of covariates. And for each and every one of them, I have a regression coefficient beta, which is again also p-dimensional. And then I assume in logistic regression, we assume the model yi, and I'm missing a key assumption here, is independent. All of these are independent with Bernoulli distribution with certain probability of success, which in logistic regression is e to the power xi transpose beta divided by 1 plus e to the power xi transpose beta. Okay. Now this, as I mentioned before, is sort of seems like arbitrarily chosen. And as you change this, probability, the form of the probability of success as a function of x's and betas, we get different types of Bernoulli regression models, essentially. Nonetheless, for logistic regression, this is our function. And once I write it like this, I can write it probabilistically in the sense that probability of yi equals 1 is this ratio over here, which is RPI, right? So all of this is exactly as it was in a few previous videos. Now our goal is to estimate beta. So we want our maximum likelihood estimates of beta. And as usual, I write down the likelihood. Now, because of the independence assumption, the likelihood is a product I going from 1 through n, pi to the power yi, 1 minus pi to the power 1 minus yi. And then I plug in the values of pi and take log. And that, again, from the previous video, I know looks like L beta is this negative summation plus summation yi xi transpose beta. Okay. And when I take the derivative, again, I did this in the previous Newton-Raphson video because in Newton-Raphson, we needed both the derivative and the Hessian. But when I take the derivative, I get summation I going from 1 to n, xi, yi minus e to the power xi transpose beta by 1 plus e to the power xi transpose beta. Now, what's the thing to note here is that this xi is in Rp, right? So this is a column vector, and there is a univariate quantity associated with each of those ith observations column vectors, and then I add all of these. So it's basically like a weighted average or a weighted sum. There's no 1 by n here. So it's basically like a weighted sum, right? And this is also why then this gradient is naturally in Rp. So this is just for you to be able to understand that when you look at these gradients and Hessians, sometimes it can be confusing to do matrix calculus, matrix derivatives, etc. Just look at the expression that you get and understand what lies in which space. What is p-dimensional? What is a scalar? Are all products and everything compatible? These things are going to really help you understand, are we on the right track, and have I made a silly mistake somewhere? Okay, once you take a gradient and you set it to 0, we've discussed this before, we see that an analytical solution here does not seem to be possible. And because beta is not isolated outside of the summation, it's very much in the summation in a very complicated way, so that you can't really isolate beta to set it to something. And so that means we do require a numerical optimization tool to actually find roots of this. And the other thing we already know is that the Hessian for this likelihood function is in fact a positive or negative definite, which means the objective function is in fact concave. And this is why we could use Newton-Raphson, and it did work in the previous few videos. But in this here, we're going to use gradient ascent just because we can choose to use whatever we want, right? Both of them are supposed to work. We can choose to use whatever we want. I'm going to go over the code in a lot more detail in the next R video, but here's some of the chunk of what's going on. First, I load a library MCMC. Now, this is just to load a data set. Here's a logit data set, which is basically a simulated data set. It's an artificial data set with 4 covariates and 1 response. So we have 1 response y's, which is a bunch of zeros and ones, and a bunch of vectors every time for every observation. These are just sort of numbers that don't mean anything because it's a simulated data. And then I isolate my response y as y. I isolate my x matrix as dot matrix columns 2 through 5 of the logit data set. And then further, notice that I am not adding a column vector of ones. So if I want, I could, do my X matrix, and I could also do ones, so this is a sort of a sub X matrix and a column vector of ones, in which case this whole thing becomes my X matrix. And then I have a, what is called an intercept term in my regression model. But I'm not doing that here, just for variety, just to let you know that, sometimes it's a modeling choice to include it or not to include it. Another thing I just want to remind the audience here is that this lecture and these lectures are not about logistic regression, but about gradient ascent and Newton-Raphson, right? We're learning about computational tools. So I am nowhere close to explaining logistic regression appropriately. I'm nowhere close to really explaining what's going on in a logistic regression model. There'll be other courses that are more relevant to understand some of the more finer details about these models. Okay, so once we have that, then we also set P, which is the dimension of my x's, or my second dimension of my x's. And then finally, from my from my Newton-Raphson, I also have the gradient function coded up. So I just take that gradient function, right? And I basically returns the gradient later on. This is according to the formula that we've determined. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from a vector of zeros. I'm going to set the gradient in the beginning to be a really large number so that it doesn't exit out of the tolerance immediately. I'm going to set t to be equal to 0.1. Now I'll play around with this t in the next video and show you what really happens when I change t. I set a tolerance and I set iter to be equal to 0. Now often in gradient ascent, it's going to take a long time to actually reach a stable point, which means that we don't just want to run the loop until the gradient is less than tolerance. We might also want to put a hard cap on the number of iterations that this loop is going to take, because we don't want to keep on waiting. And so in order to do that, I also add, do the loop while the gradient is more than tolerance and while the number of iterations is less than 10,000. As soon as it goes over 10,000, as in k goes over 10,000, I know I'm not really converging very quickly. So maybe the choice of t or the starting value or something's not quite right. Okay. Now in the loop, I increase iter. I change old to be my current value of beta k. I calculate my gradient, which is stored in foo. The grads is the sum of foo squared. Okay, so this is going to be my Euclidean distance or Euclidean measure of um, how big is the gradient vector? Is it close to zero or not? And every time the loop loops, it checks whether grads is close to zero or not. Okay? And then once I've done that, I do beta k is old plus t times foo. Right? So this is the old value plus t times the gradient. And then I basically am going to store all the beta values as well. And we're doing this for a particular reason that I'll show you in the R code. Once that finishes, once I run this and the loop finishes, it exits out, and then iter is the number of iterations it took. And in this case, it only took 27. So that's great. That's not too many. Certainly not as large as 10,000. And beta k, the last estimate at what is the final estimate of beta, the MLE, is 0.71, 0.88, 0.42, 0.59, essentially. And that means, that this is exactly going to be my estimate is my MLE that estimates beta. Right? And so we can take this problem and go back to the logistic regression framework and say, okay, here's what my best guess for beta is. Now let's use my best guess for beta to answer other interesting questions about the data. Okay, now this is a different data set from the Titanic data set. So I'd like you to be able to implement the gradient ascent for the Titanic data set. I think it might be interesting because you're going to have to choose T appropriately, and that might take some effort. So that's a great thing to try and implement. And then another thing we'll discuss in the next video as well is when we change T, we'll see things behaving quite differently. And so what I want you to think about just as a thought exercise is, how can we change T? How can we adapt T? What is causing some T's to work well? What is causing some T's not to work well? And so these are things I want you to think about when you sort of run the code and sort of fiddle around with some of these settings.